Morning, dear friends, from lands distant and not so distant. We at KFI Kolkata have something really very special this morning, apart from everything else. Define vocabulary and rules of expression, I suppose, in many ways. Bearing in mind that the word is not the thing, the description is not the described, and that the word, though necessary to communicate, does not necessarily convey the full significance of that word. And as most of us are prisoners to words, we must go beyond the word, which would be real communication. Communication, as Kay would say, is not merely listening to someone, but sharing what is being said. Sharing implies not only the verbal communication, but sharing the space between the words, reading between the lines. And to share is a responsibility. And to share it properly, we must both meet at the same point, at the same time, with the same intensity. Otherwise, there is no sharing at all. So it's our joint responsibility this morning, not only to listen to what is being said by Michael and Mark and Asha, but also to share seriously in the thing that is being said. All of us must be sufficiently serious, sufficiently adventurous, enough to go deeply into the question and experiences that they're going to talk about. I thank Michael and Mark and Asha for this magnificent Sunday / Saturday evening. So I will briefly give the agenda which we have this morning. It'll be for an hour and a half, and I suppose the floor will be completely with Michael and Mark after Kamalji does a brief introduction. And before we begin with Kamalji, I would just quickly like to say that kindly keep your videos on and keep yourselves on mute so that it'll be easy for us to communicate. And Kamalji, the floor is all yours.
Yeah. So just want to thank everybody for making it this morning. First of all, Mark, Asha, Michael. It's wonderful to have all of you here. And also, today is quite remarkable because I was looking around the flow of people who joined us today. Incidentally, all the people that were part of my journey in Krishnamurti Foundation since 2004, almost all of them are here today. Professor Krishna, Swami Chedanand, Mr. Kanda Swami, Chabraji. I think so many people, I just can't name all of them. Everybody is there. So it's such a delight to see everybody at one platform. And also, it's another strange coincidence because we have a number of people today who are authors on Krishnamurti. We have Professor Krishna, we have Mark, we have Michael Mendizza, and then we have Roshan Dalal who wrote a book recently. So that's another first for me actually to see all of you on one program. And of course, thanks to people who have joined from all over the place. We sent all these invites. We were so happy to see even people from joining as far away as Brazil, where it's an unearthly time of about 2 o'clock in the morning. And people like Sharif, who's a coach. Sharif is a coach, and we'll find out later, but he just joined, he lives in Dubai. So we've had people from all over India, different parts of India, west, south, north, east, everywhere. So it's such a delightful event, actually. And just a word on 2020. It's very strange because this year began with Mark and Asha for us in Kolkata. And it was one man's passion, actually. My colleague Prabir is a very passionate man. And he just keeps on talking to people till he gets something happening. And this February, we had Mark and Asha in Kolkata. And that was really delightful 2 days for us because Mark made 2 wonderful talks there in Kolkata. And he visited the Kolkata Book Fair. And he happened to be there when a documentary on Krishnamurti was being produced. So it was a big bonus for us. And then COVID set in. And then soon after, when we started all these online programs, we had Michael on our show. And even that program was really so spectacular for me because he brought a freshness to understanding Krishnamurti as someone who has made it his own. So I think that was something that I really appreciated. And now again, So now as we approach the end of the year, and we again have both of them together with Asha. And it's amazing. I think it's some of these things, I think I would call them just benediction. And how it happened is also very important. Just to get the flavor of it, I mentioned the passion of my colleague Prabir Banerjee. He was very keen to get Mark on one of these programs. And somehow or the other, in the discussion that happened, this idea of a chat, with Mark, Asha, and Michael, that came across. And it was something like a jugalbandi, I suppose, And that was so good that it happened because it was different. And Michael approaches everything with a lot of passion. And then you'll see that, when that happens, he'll tell you more about the program, how it's going to play out. So that's something I want to pay tribute to my colleague, Prabir. He does this regularly. And also want to thank my colleague Sayan, who's our anchor, who does all the looking after the program and then produces the videos, etc. And the format of the program, Sayan has just mentioned. So not much to say about the format. We'll perhaps have some time for interaction. And with that, over to Michael, Mark, and Asha.
I'll be happy to begin. As I said earlier, the phrase "old friends" applies really quite beautifully to my relationship with Mark and Asha. It goes back a long time, so it's always been a joy to be able to collaborate with Mark and to work with him and to get a feeling of how things are going with him. I would very often, when new ideas or new writings would come up, I would turn to Mark and say, "What do you think?" And and he has been one of the most supportive colleagues that I have in my life, and it's been just a wonderful friendship to be able to be engaged at such intimate ways with the information that we're dealing with. So it's a joy and a pleasure, and to be able to be here and to share with you with Mark. Rather spontaneously, I have a number of interviews that I had done with Mark a long time ago, and I don't know, it was a year and a half ago, something like that. It was, and I really felt like it was important to tape another interview. So we arranged that, and I drove to Ojai to be with him, and that's what we're going to share with you. It was totally unscripted. There was no script. There was no agenda. We just started to have a conversation, and I taped it. So that's what you're going to be sharing in. You're not going to hear my part of it because I've taken and just focused on Mark as well. So that's where it started. And then we're going to finish up with a clip from Asha that I did quite some time ago. And that'll be kind of the climax of the event. So I'm really looking forward to it. Mark, any comments that you want to make before we share the first video?
I just would like to say that having Michael do this program today is a small taste of the extraordinary work that Michael has done in his lifetime. I mean, this goes back to the 70s, and Michael, more than any other person in the world, has chronicled Krishnamurti's life and teachings to such an extraordinary extent. He has produced an archive unto itself of original K material, not only filming the talks in Ojai and other cities, other places in the world, but also producing films. He has put together remarkable programs that really are of enormous historical importance, because Michael has this overview of the whole of Kay's life and his teaching that he draws on with great ease. He pulls out of his archives amazing clips, amazing dialogues, and weaves together programs that, I mean, they'll go on for centuries because Michael's record of Kay's life and teachings is unmatched, is unparalleled. And I think all of the valuable material, much of it, we've never even seen. I mean, the 100 videos, interviews of people who knew Krishnamurti that make up the first generation series, these are priceless records of people who were in direct contact with Krishnamurti. And you haven't seen them, we haven't seen them all. But I remember Evelyn Blau once said, what a difference the world would be if people who knew Jesus Christ could be interviewed or could be contacted. The world today would be vastly different from what it is. Similarly with Michael's interviews, he's gone into such incredible depth, not only just as records of people speaking, but also his probing questioning of their states of mind, their experiences. All of this has produced a record beyond match. So I think that the Krishnamurti world and the world at large really has a great debt because Michael has chronicled this world teacher in a way that will change history.
Well, I wish I hadn't been such a slow learner.
Well, we learned, yeah, you learned along with everyone, and you, by recording and chronicling that learning process, you have drawn in the rest of humanity.
Well, I really appreciate all of that. We do have to pay tribute to Evelyn, who was my partner and colleague and inspiration. We did all of those things together. So Evelyn was a great visionary, and yes, her passion for the oral history was really important, and that's really what led to a lot of what Mark is talking about. So I was there to help her and to bring this thing about. So, and I learned every experience was a learning one for me. So there's no debt because I was, my life has been changed immensely. Just imagine what a great life I've had to be able to do what I've been doing. So it's been a joy and continues to be. I'm still inspired and writing and I'm actually curious to see how some of this is going to continue to unfold. So it's not done for me, that's for sure. Let's go to this first interview clip that we're going to share. And again, this was a pretty spontaneous conversation, and I'm going to read for you a couple of phrases that I have pulled out as highlights so that you can kind of focus in on those as we go through it. Number one, why has thousands of years of religion not worked? All the esoteric things. Krishnaji said, no, go in a different direction. So this was one of the essence statements. Another theme that we deal with in this first clip is there's only the body, which I think I would like to explore a little bit with Mark on that. And then the third piece, which I think is great, understanding what we have and who we are is the door to the other. So those are the key phrases that are woven that Mark drew out in this first clip. So let me share my screen. And let's share it and go to Mark. Let's go here.
Negating also the whole trajectory of all religious movements, all organized religion and philosophy all point in another direction. So how can he get away with it? How can he put all of that aside and say that's not the door? You don't go through that. You go in a completely different direction. And this is the amazing thing about the whole of his life and his teaching was he's going in other directions. He's saying, see all of this, see what humanity has done, see what the mind does, and stop, hold on. Don't go that way. Look at it differently. Go see why it hasn't worked. Why has thousands of years of religion not worked? And all of the esoteric things, and all, they may all have some validity somewhere, but for you, the serious person who's trying to find something different, go in a different direction. This is the amazing thing. I know that the story that I tell in my book of a conference here in Ojai where David Bohm and some scientists got together in Arivahara and had 2 or 3 days of discussions about the brain and the mind. And they looked at it from every possible angle. And Krishnamurti kept injecting himself, questioning the assumptions they had made. And at the end of the weekend, the third day, it was over with. And he walked out, and I went out with him, closed the door behind, and he stood there at the outside, and he just stopped and he said, "No, I stick with it. There is only the body. There is only the body." Well, I took that to mean there is only consciousness, there is only the senses, there is only that which we have. Speculation about a mind, speculation about how the brain would function, and the integration or the differences and distinctions of the two was a wrong direction. There is a great Indian poet who also said that if you touch the body, you touch the universe. The body being all of that, consciousness, the senses, the brain, all of it together, all of it working together. He denied the left brain, right brain dichotomy and said the brain should be studied, looked at as a whole, not separately, not left brain, right brain, but how it functions or dysfunctions as a whole. So all of this says the same thing. Understanding what we have and who we are is the door to the other.
So we should be back. I'd like to begin by having Mark elaborate a little bit about. I mean, I think we have a pretty good idea why the traditions haven't worked, right? I mean, I hope that that's. I'm not necessarily trying to skip over it, but I think that from Krishnamurti's perspective, that issue seems pretty clear to me. Mark, should we go into that one, or should we go into the body part? Because that, I think, is a little bit more salient, perhaps. But what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think you point to it that Kay has laid it out, and I think most serious people have seen what the truth of what Kay said when he shows the state of human consciousness, the state of the world, and puts into question, by bringing it into high relief, the whole of tradition, the whole of human history, and saying something so radically different and using everyday common language, but questioning all the things that humankind has taken to be sacred. There's that old adage that unless you understand history, you are bound to repeat it. Well, this is what we do. We repeat generation after generation, century after century. All of these enormous failures that have been organized and are believed in and followed in multitudes of religions and belief systems. So I think that's all fairly clear. I don't know that we can go any further with that. So maybe we can go on to the other issue.
Yeah, I'd like to say that to realize that when he says the word is not the thing, that's so simple. It's so obvious. The word is not the thing. It's a symbol. It's a metaphor. David Bohm was the first person who introduced me to the word reify. So to reify is to treat an abstraction or a mental image as though it were a concrete reality. So that's basically what the trick that's going on. So all of your beliefs, everything that you think about, all thought is metaphoric. All thought is basically, thought is it has its own world. It's its own structure, and that is not intelligence. That those images are not intelligence. Those images are not what he calls sacred. Those images are not what we call truth. It's not found there. So of course you would have to say you have to go. Don't go there. It's not there. It's just simply not there. Anyway, so that's kind of the paradox of the misuse of memory. Reification is implicit in the whole game, that we trick ourselves like a magician, and then we believe the trick that we just played on ourselves, but we don't know that we did it. And that's kind of what's taking place with the whole deal. So we build all these symbols and all these things, but they're not alive, they're not living, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of the ground that when he says no, it's not there, it's someplace else, he's really talking, I think, in that vein. But let's go into this observation when he walks out. And I remember the dialogues that you were talking about, and they spent a lot of time talking about the brain and the mind not being in the brain and the mind being out of it, and so on. And I think that's the link, that when he walked out the door and said, no, I'm going to stick with it, it's only the body. I'd like to go into that a little bit, because that cuts through a lot. He's actually a very similar statement than no, it's not there. Because when we reify the mind, which is basically what we're doing in that form, we're playing the same game, but we're tricking ourselves again, and which is something we do endlessly. So let's go a little bit, Mark. Again, it's only the body. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, to me, it was so poignant, because spending 3 days with experts, Nobel laureates, and the likes of David Bohm and other scientifically minded people, looking at what was in that time a big issue, this brain-mind synthesis, this brain-mind analysis consciousness, the origins of consciousness, the dimensions of consciousness, all of this going into it for 3 days, and then Kay just annihilating everything by saying, no, there is only the body, was it was a devastating statement. And I wished he had said it out loud in front of all of those scientists, because in some ways he was drawing them out. He was trying to get them to expose the current thinking on these issues. And yet it wasn't as devastating as when he was standing out in the patio after it was all over with. And it put it into a perspective that was needed. But anyway, there is only the body. He didn't talk a great deal publicly about the operation of the senses, but in schools, in the K schools, the discussion about senses was very important. He tried to show children how one of the whole purposes of being educated was to develop the 7 senses, not just the few that we are familiar with, touch, taste, hearing, and so on, but the 7 senses, that it was through these senses that the body could apprehend the real world. And he even went so far as to talk about the arts of living and learning, listening and hearing, and in an effort to focus on for the child and for the teacher, the importance of the cultivation and the development of the senses and sensitivity. Sensitivity being the important word, because to touch the world, seen and unseen, the explicit and the implicit, the exoteric, the esoteric, it's the senses that are required. And I don't think that, I wish he'd given more time to this in his public talks, how important this cultivation, this development of bodily sensitivity was.
Let's there's as you talk, there are threads of what you just said that are woven into some of the other clips that we're going to touch on, and part of this is what we're going to come to with this notion of the difference between silence and dullness. So what he's really trying to do is cultivate a quality of attention which he calls silence, but implicitly that's a quality of attention, and in that in silent attention there's extraordinary sensitivity, which is why with the kids he's focusing on the senses, because he's really but as soon as thought comes in, you become dull, right? Dull thought is dull compared to awake present attention. So this sense of dullness. So let's go on and move forward to the next clip. And like he said, hold on to some of these thoughts, or even take some notes so that we can loop back, because there's common themes that we'll be touching on as we do this. So I'll go on to the next one.
I think because we admit complexity, we are looking for what is not there in front of us. We are looking constantly for another picture, a larger explanation, and it's not there. You can find it by making it up. You can find it by imagining it or fantasizing or conceptualizing, but in fact it's not there. So the schools, K schools and any other school, are left with utterly, utterly simple questions to be asked. Why educate? What does it mean for a child to be in relationship with a teacher? What is that child's relationship with the world? What is needed to open that child up to life, to consciousness, to everything? And the incredible thing is that Kay doesn't tell us. He doesn't say, do this, do that. This is the door. This is the pathway. This is the thing that this is the technique. He doesn't even suggest any of this. He talks all around it, but he leaves hints, he leaves clues as to what's the essential part. And this is what we miss. We miss these clues. And the clues are pretty obvious because they're there in that child that we're faced with every day. They're there in our own children. They're there in all the literature. It's all there. Wake up and look at it. It is increasing sensitivity, increasing awareness, may not be increasing it, but just allowing it to be full, to develop. Look at everything that prevents a child from being awake. Look at the child's conditioning, that you as the teacher impose, that you as the parent impose, that what the culture impose, what all the media impose, all of that, see all of that. Be awake to it, see it for what it is, and see it from the mind of the child. The rest of education is a breeze. From that, the rest of it is really not as important.
So, what are the clues that Krishnaji does not give? I really love that in this piece. He dropped hints, but he wouldn't be concrete about it and give you a formula to follow. Mark, would you open that up a little bit? Why do you think that he didn't just give, make it explicit?
Well, it was so typical. I think Kay saw that people picked up on statements that he made and turned them into some kind of a K dogma, or a K process, or a K approach, without knowing what they were doing. Because they used him as the authority on everything, psychological and spiritual. So he saw that that was what happened around him. So his whole movement, his whole effort was to make his audience sensitive, to make them wake up. So when I say hints and clues, I mean he dropped these obviously throughout his teachings and his conversations, in an effort to get you, the listener, to figure it out, to find out, to do the work, to probe yourself. Because if you just adopted it from K, you just picked it up from K and repeated it, it would just be some secondhand formula that you had divined and would then apply, or try to develop. So he was doing with the listener what he wanted us to do as teachers, or us to do with him was to wake up. And when we say wake up, we mean in a complete sense. Wake up psychologically, wake up physically, wake up the senses, wake up the mind. Because, as he said so often, we're sleeping. We're not attentive, we're not listening, we're not paying attention, we're not careful. So it's really reduced to such elemental qualities, utterly elemental.
When a colleague of mine used the phrase sleepwalking, right? So, and I find myself, I'm even taking a walk in the park, and I'm chattering, I'm thinking about this. There's all kinds of noise that I'm experiencing because I'm actually sleepwalking. Whenever I'm thinking, I'm in a dream. A thought is a dream, right? So if you're thinking, you're dreaming, and if you're dreaming, you're not present. And that means you're not intelligent. You're not sensitive in this way that he was talking about. So you're in a dream. That's what you mean by waking up. You mean stepping out of the dream, which means having that whole process that we call thinking and thought just not be on. That's period. And then there's this expansion of silent attention with its implied intelligence that just gets bigger and bigger, and then you can actually respond to what's going on instead of responding to your dream. That might be my way of saying it. And if he told you what to do, then you would naturally get back into the dream because you would be doing what he said to do, which is another dream, and you wouldn't be actually doing what he's talking about. So that would be my way of trying to deal with this kind of game that we play with ourselves. I also love the phrase that you said, look at everything that prevents the child from not being awake.
Yes.
Being present.
Wow, was that a great one, right? That was just so spot on. Let's go back and hold this notion of the daydream. We're in our daydream. We're looking at the kid and we're expecting the kid to conform to our daydream, which means that we're not really seeing the kid at all. We're seeing our daydream, not the kid. So we're out of sync with who the child is, and we're expecting them to, anyway, it's a total disaster, right? But that's what we call normal. And of course the kid is upset because we're not really seeing who they are and what they're feeling because we're in our dream. Anyway, so, we are the primary cause of that child falling asleep because we are modeling this sleepwalking behavior as though that's intelligent and the way that one should live in the world. You also said see it from the mind of the child, and again that would break the spell. In order for you to actually see it from the mind of the child, you would have to be awake. You would have to be silently attentive and let that sensitivity with its intelligence just expand. So great works. Let's go on to the next. I hope you don't mind if we just play like this a little bit, show the video, and then go back and forth. I hope it meets your needs. Take some notes because we'll then loop back at the end and explore the various things. So let's go on to the next.
I think that if you look at a talk, one talk is a microcosm of it's the micro of the macro. You don't have to be an analyst or a scholar to see that. You can just listen. And as you're listening, you're watching your reactions. As you're reading, you're watching your reactions. And the reactions often tell you some of those missing guide points, some of those bullets that you are expecting as a listener. Even as a serious person, the mind fills in gaps or tries to fill in and starts to look in different directions as a talk unfolds. The same thing can be said of a meditation. As you're meditating, you see how the mind is looking for something, is asking and answering its own questions. You do that as a talk unfolds. All right? What does it show you? It shows you the utter lack of listening. And he points that out. You're not listening. You don't hear. And you could say that as you're reading something. You're not listening, but you're not paying attention. So being conscious of the fact that you're not listening, wanting a question answered, not staying with something for long. You pointed out that the attention span has decreased over the last century to a ridiculous, almost impossible to comprehend low level. He points that out as well, and we expect that we get an answer quickly. We expect that of him, we expect that of ourselves. He points out that's not the issue. The answer is not the issue. So looking for an answer. Also, not being, he points out that as you're listening, as you're exploring something, question what you're seeing. You question it in the speaker, you question it in the author, you question it in your own consciousness, your own mind. So you're not questioning. You're accepting what is being said. That's probably the hardest of all, because the questioning can become, as he says, a habit. It can become a thing that leaves you with ashes. You remove everything by questioning everything to such an extent and to agree that there's nothing left. You've missed it all in the questioning, if it goes too far. So I'd say those are my quick look at it. Those are the main things that he points to, in addition to not giving formulas, not giving answers. And he's demonstrating it as he's speaking, as he's writing. It's the talk itself is a demonstration of that.
The word inquiry is a word that is, percolates through many of the Krishnamurti centers, and so to inquire. And I think there's this difference between silent, wakeful, sensitive attention and questioning, right? But it could be that we're really just looking at a flip of the word. Maybe if we rephrase or reframe the word to question or to inquire, and if you take it out of the intellect, if you take this idea of inquiry out of thought, what would it be? Right? To inquire, but not inquire with thought. What would it be? And I'm going to suggest that that's because I think that's that silent mind that he kept drawing our attention back to has a quality of attention to it, which is different than the intellect talking to itself trying to answer its questions, or to answer the question. So I think that if we could reframe the word to question and to inquire and take it out of the intellect and have it be embodied back to the senses, that we would gain a lot. We would understand a great deal more about what he meant, because I think we might be misinterpreting the word because we're listening to it in the intellect, and justifying it within the intellect, whereas that's not where I think he's centered. I think he's embodied, like Mark said, only in the body. So anyway, that was my takeaway from this. Mark, thoughts on your commentary?
Yes, I think you've hit it, Michael. Kate constantly asked people to inquire, to explore, to probe, to question, and he never gave any guidelines as to how that is done. But because he kept referencing it over and over again, and because he saw what was happening in the schools and in the foundations and in the groups that he met as he traveled around the world, he saw this inquiry process turning into a new system, and we've seen it become full-blown in the 30-plus years since his passing. That dialogue has mushroomed everywhere, and we have dialogue groups. We have almost a new religion that promotes dialogue. We've seen people attempting to solve all human problems through dialogue. We've seen attempts to run businesses only through dialogue. So dialogue has taken on almost a sacred quality, but it is what is pretty obvious. It's all of, for the most part, a function of the intellect. It's questions and answers, not originating from inquiry and driven by perception, but by the complexities of the intellect. And I mean, I have become quite unhappy, almost disgusted with what passes as a Krishnamurti dialogue, because it's just a further expression of intellectual debate or intellectual conversation, but it's not driven by insight that comes from listening.
Yeah, I'll just chip in a little bit with David Bohm, because obviously David and Kay kind of originated this process that is called dialogue, and they did it for a long time. They really worked at it, and it was quite a remarkable, priceless thing that they did. But in speaking with David and really even conducting various dialogue groups and so on and so forth, it became quite clear from his perspective that he was not searching for an answer. Dialogue to him was not to come up with a new idea or to even have an insight and any of that stuff. Basically, David's goal was for us to grasp, to perceive the subtle and intricacies of the thought process. So this was his way. This was his way of being able. It was a laboratory, literally. Well, let's use it at that. It was a laboratory, so that we could come to this with more attention than we normally do, because normally we're daydreaming, right? if we're thinking, we're daydreaming. And so when we're conversing with somebody, we're sharing this daydream together. And that's not what they wanted us to do, is to be more clever at that. What David wanted us to do was to perceive the almost imperceptible subtlety and quickness of how thought works, and how it deceives itself, and how one person triggers somebody else, and so on and so forth. So he was really interested in using the dialogue circle as a mirror, so that we could see ourselves and discover more about how thought works, so that we could begin to use it more precisely, to become more precise with how we use the tool that's called thought, instead of just going to the movies and, you know, falling asleep for all day and then maybe waking up with a bit of lucidity. So, and I'm going to reference that back to what I said about the difference between questioning being analysis, intellectual analysis, and questioning being childlike wonder and curiosity, because you've just walked over a hill and you've never seen whatever it is that you're looking at before. And to come with that immediate present sensitivity and open wonder. And I see that more of what Kay was referring to when he says to inquire. But we hear it with the intellect, and so we go to the intellect, and it just basically stays there instead of waking up from the intellect. So anyway, let's go on to the next one and see where we go.
Krishnamurti's teachings in his life are 100% esoteric. At one point he denies everything esoteric and says that it's all meaningless. But at the same time, the whole of what he's pointing to, the whole of what he explores through his books and tapes, is completely esoteric. What does that mean? It's hidden. It's not obvious. You have to work at it to discover it. You don't have to be a special person. You don't have to be highly educated or highly refined to understand or to see what is esoteric. But it is your responsibility as a serious person to find out, to look and see. And I think that what he was suggesting was that we had all gone partially into it. We'd all gone only so far as our temperament, as far as our energy, as far as our professions, as far as our interests would allow. It hadn't gone all the way. Now, one doesn't have to become a monk or a celibate or a adept or a what other extreme do we think of? We don't have to be cut off from the world to see what is obvious, to see what is there. But we have to be awake. We have to be alert. And I think he was saying, you're not. I mean, he was a very clear critic of those who were around and pretended to be serious. That was his role. I mean, only he could say that. No one else could say that. And if anyone else says it, it's hollow. It doesn't mean anything. But he says that, you have to look. And again, he's putting right back on us. You've gone part way up the mountain. You haven't gone all the way to the top. Now, he doesn't know everyone, or he didn't know everyone who heard him or read. In some far-off place, there are likely to have been people who fully understood what he was talking about and lived that. They didn't come to Ojai, they didn't come to England, they didn't go to India. But they were different. They understood. They had gone seriously, deeply into it. Fine. If we never heard of them, he didn't meet them, perfectly normal, perfectly understandable.
I think this question that Mark just answered was prompted in part by the prompt that, well, nobody's been transformed, nobody's gotten it. You know, he spent his whole life doing all of this, and he even said, you know, nobody's got it. And I think part of what, certainly the end part of Mark's statement, when he was referring to, you know, they didn't show up, they didn't come. So Kay was really dealing with a certain quality of person who was there, and as Mark said, he was very critical of all of those people who were there, relentlessly so. Let's go back to the beginning, Mark, when you said that it's hidden, right? You said 100% esoteric. Help us with what you mean by that. Let's go there.
I'm using the word as it was originally intended. There is the esoteric and the exoteric. The esoteric is very simply that which is hidden in life, that which is not manifest, that which has no form, has no order, apparently. Now, there have been, over the centuries, remarkable and amazing esoteric schools, esoteric inquiries, people with clairvoyance, with clairaudience, people with great abilities, siddhis, who've devoted their lives to exploring the hidden dimensions. Theosophy is replete with this in its literature and in the individuals who are part of the Theosophical Society, the exploration of what is hidden and not obvious. Kay had a lot of experience with this movement that started in his lifetime with what Blavatsky and Besant and Leadbeater and all the others had explored and developed. But when I say that Kay's teachings, and I use it in the whole sense, all of it is hidden. I mean that he is looking, he's talking about, he's referencing the state of the human life, consciousness and beyond, that is not apparent. And he's doing it by talking about all of the manifestations, all of the great complex conflicts that humanity lives with. So he's talking about the exoteric, the manifestations, in an effort to push us inward, deeper, to look at the causes, the deep underlying roots. When he said, look at fear, but find the root of fear. So, and then you know how he would go into that topic. all of the psychological issues have deep hidden roots. And his explication, his going into these states of being, make up a large portion of the teachings. So I'm not trying to put Kay's teachings into a special category or define them in any way by saying that. I'm just saying that he defies the traditional analysis and codification that we are used to in looking at a new way of living, because you can't define it, you can't codify it as we are used to.
Let me jump in because go ahead.
I think that's what I mean when I use that term.
Yep. You know, Mark, I'm sitting here because I think that this notion of hidden, this one phrase, Kay's teachings are fundamentally hidden, esoteric, meaning hidden. And I'm going to loop and share with you, Bill Quinn was in Ojai and was with Kay during the war years. And he defined the term mystic. And this was a breathtaking, simple thing. He said a mystic in the classic term was somebody who saw what was hidden. That was a mystic. But then he went on to make it more specific. He said, and specifically, hidden from the mind of image and concept. Hidden from the mind of image and concept. Now, if you take what Mark just said, the essence of Kay's teachings are hidden from the mind of image and concept. Now, that to me is one of the most distilled descriptions of what the whole thing is, right? We're in the mind of image and concept, and he's talking about something other than that. Yeah. Period. So, and that's all he's doing. You could see this over and over again, that all he's trying to do is get you to stop the dream, which is image and concept, so that you can actually, see what it is. And so anyway, I think that this statement that you've made, could be a can opener. You could apply this statement, hidden from the mind of image and concept, to every talk, every moment, every metaphor, everything he does. Is that he's trying to awaken you out of what you can't see while you're stuck in image and concept, right? So anyway, that was my takeaway from listening to the piece. I think it was really great. We'll go on to the next. This is a nice one. This is the one on dullness.
I remember one day, or this actually happened several times, where we were sitting in a small group in Aryavahara in the very early days, and talking about the meditative mind and silence, and what did it mean to be quiet. And he said, after a long pause, he said, be careful, be aware. There's a difference between the silent mind and the dull mind. What is the difference? And that then led into an exploration of that. But I think that says something. It says something about our propensity to confuse the lack of thought, the lack of intellectualization, the lack of thinking with a truly quiet mind. It's not that. It could be simply, very simply, that you're utterly dull. You're not awake. You're not alert. And he said at other points that the meditative mind is wide awake. It's electric with energy. It's perceptive. There may not be movement, but there is awareness. And awareness is quite the opposite of dullness. At another point, he warned me. He said, "Be careful of the intellectuals." And the paradox, of course, is that he was surrounded by intellectuals. There were multitude of intellectuals. He was a magnet for intellectuals. He said his best audience in India was Chennai because there was this Brahmanical brain that was so full of knowledge, so rich with information, spiritual, secular. These were people that he could talk with easily. At the same time, he warned against it. So it is our inclination, it is our propensity to think things through. Ask a question, you don't sit with it, you answer it. Your mind intellectualizes what you see, what you hear. This is the way the mind works. But here's someone who comes along and says, watch it, see it, doubt it, question it. That process short circuits that process.
Got another gem here, just an absolutely priceless thing, the difference between the dullness and what Mark was talking about, the quiet state that is exploding with energy and sensitivity, right? So that's what he was saying. I remember filming in Chennai, in Madras, the talks a long time ago, and he said to gather every particle of energy that you can have to inquire. Now I'm saying inquiry not intellectually to analysis, but in this alert, sensitive, that's what he meant by inquiring. That's what he meant by every particle to look at it, to see, not to dialogue with yourself and in this daydream, not intensify the daydream by talking to yourself intently, but this other quality that he's talking about. So the difference between the mind, the meditative mind, or the silent mind, and which is this electric quality of attention and sensitivity that Mark talks about, and dullness. And I remember Rinpoche was talking about that when in our dialogues with Samdang Rinpoche, how easy it is for the mental processes to drag us back asleep again, the habituation, the habits that the mind is. So Always Awakening is the name of the book that we picked for those dialogues or conversations with him. And it speaks to this, Always Awakening, speaks to this quality of attention that Mark was just saying is there. And be careful of intellectuals. Why? Because just think of that intellectual process is a dream, and it's implicitly dull compared to this other that we've just been talking about. Let's go on.
Right, you have esoteric and you have exoteric. You have the hidden and the obvious. Well, of course he railed against the traditional esoteric. He had grown up with people who claimed that this was the most important dimension of life. That the esoteric, and of course this is what all the churches and this is what all great religions have talked about, the dimension which only a believer, an anointed, a developed person could comprehend. So that again creates the separation. So esoteric in the traditional sense, as in the use of the word religion, as the classical old world meaning of religion, he approached it differently. His use of the word religion, his use of the word esoteric was quite different. Esoteric is something which is not obvious. It's hidden by consciousness. It's hidden by culture. It's hidden by thought. It's not immediately approachable unless you have understood all of this. You've understood the movement of thought, unless you've understood what you are, the content of what you are, then it remains hidden. But once you have understood that, then it becomes, it's no longer esoteric. It's there, it's obvious, it's a reality.
Mark, could you go a little further? This flip from when you said once you see it, the seeing that I hear you referring to is not as a concept. You're actually seeing how thought is a dream, is a daydream. It's not this awake, always awakening state. When you see that, so you have to, I'm saying, and I'm just fishing a little bit here, because in order to actually reflect and to see what thought does as a system, as David Bohm would describe it, one actually has to be out of it. You can't be in thought in order to see how thought's working. You need to step out of it, and you have to, which means a different state. You have to be in a different state. And I think that's what you meant by seeing it. When you see it, then it's no longer hidden. But if you're in the dream, it's hidden. Was that close to what you were talking about?
Yes, you've got it. It's you've said it very utterly simply. That's exactly what it is. It's awareness. And that, I mean, he uses it as a title of a book, the flame of it's a flame of attention,
right?
Flame of awareness, something to that extent. It burns away, literally burns away the perception. The perception burns away the dream, right. Burns away the image, the myth, the thought, all of it. That's the quality of attention.
I'm going to also throw out here, because when we talked about esoteric in the traditional sense, that is with the theosophists and clairvoyants and so on and so forth, those, he would challenge that, because what happens is that imagination grabs onto that potential, and then there's a quality of becoming, and I'm going to become clairvoyant, or I'm going to practice clairvoyance, I'm going to do all this stuff. And I think he would deny that that's really where it happens. I think it happens more in the state of silence, actually. And I'm going to use the word savant. So true insight happens in a savant-like state. And that's where you're fully, you're not in the intellect. The intellect is silent. You're in this charged state, and then there are fields, things other than what you have learned, and so on and so forth, that can express in the brain, and they called it insight. And those insights don't necessarily come from your conditioned past. So that's where I think the true insights or the true esoteric revelations come from. They come from that savant-like state, which is again silence, but tremendously sensitive and expansive. And so you get to spread your wings so far beyond your little dream that naturally you connect with and perceive other things. But it's not the kinds of practices and formulas and things that the early the TS did. So anyway, that's my
Right.
I love the savant image because it goes to emptiness, to use the Buddhist term, you know.
Exactly.
We have a couple more, and I want to get through all of them because then I think we can go on to open this up to the notes that I hope people are taking.
I'm not that experienced or familiar with the theosophical, the old theosophical views on all of this. But what I can tell you is my sense of what I saw around K as, and this comes from encounters with theosophists where I was present, or it comes from some highly transcendental experiences that I had with him, where there were manifestations, where there were things that happened that were beyond the rational mind. The rational mind could not comprehend them at all, which pointed for me to the truth that there was an enormous reality beyond the phenomenal world. And that K was in that, in touch with that, and he probably lived in it all the time. And there were glimpses of it, instances of it, in unguarded moments when either they would happen with him or when something would come through to him and beyond him, through to him and to all of us. Putting that into a perspective is impossible. It's impossible because for me it's fragmentary. I could only refer to the experiences that I had, and I wrote about some of these in my book. But there were other instances. K admitted on occasions that there were masters. He admitted that there were transcendental states and that phenomena, that there could be manifestations of phenomena in our world. Glimpses that what was behind all the theosophical concepts and beliefs and experiences was something that was real. But that, again, he put into a perspective that it wasn't important. He said it rather crudely on a couple of occasions, where he said they made it all so damn concrete. And there are several instances where he said that in reference to things that were happening that seemed to validate the theosophical concepts. He pulled back and said they were unimportant because they were reduced in their qualities in their importance and their reality by concept.
You know, I don't want to drop into this. I want to go to Asha's clip because these two just work so well together. So I'm going to go forward with Asha's. So hold on to the various questions. Again, take some notes around these themes because it's a big area here. And let's go on to Asha's clip, and then we'll have one more that's similar on the same kind of theme that I think is relevant here. So, to your talk.
Well, as I said, that I used to like to do flowers in his apartment. So we'd pick the flowers, and then at 4 o'clock, we'd carry these buckets. Mark would help me carry them, and I would arrange them in his apartment while Mark waded downstairs. And the apartment at that time, there used to be the stairs that would come up, and there was a veranda, and then off the veranda was his sitting room. And at the end of it was the dining room and the kitchen. And through another open area, there was the open sort of veranda which led to his bedroom. So I didn't want to, and there was a back veranda also, so I didn't want to disturb him, so I'd be very quiet. From the archway of the front room, the light would be coming in from the lamppost that was outside, and I would sit in that sort of archway and work with all my flowers and tiptoe to different points of his living room and his dining room and the entryway, and I would put these arrangements there, and it was just, I used to just love to do them anyway. So as I was sitting there quietly doing these flowers, I heard that Krishnaji in the back bedroom, there was a movement and he must have gotten up. So I became very still. I thought that he's gotten up, maybe he'll go to the bathroom or something. And he used to have wooden slippers because I used to arrange his room, so I knew that I'd put these wooden slippers in his bathroom, bedroom area. So I heard the wooden slippers make a clip, 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 clip sound, so it didn't go towards the bathroom. The clip, clip went from the side veranda area to the front veranda area, and I was just off there, so I very slowly moved myself into the shadow. So he wouldn't be startled by my being there. And so he walked across and he went towards the dining room, and I said, he's going there to get some water. And then from the shadows, and I looked out, it wasn't Krishnaji. And there could have been no one else up there who could have got up from his room and walked across that area with his slippers. What I saw was a very tall, luminescent figure, and it just quietly walked down towards the dining room, turned around and came back. And as he turned around and came back, he looked towards the archway. And I was just so still, almost I could have been dead. And it's as if whatever this figure was knew I was there, but didn't in any way, I didn't feel frightened. So on the way back from the dining room across this veranda, he sort of seemed to just look towards that archway, as if, I'd hate to say that he knew I was there because I was trying to hide, and in a way just acknowledging my presence, and then went along the verandas back to his bedroom, and then there was no sound. I picked up all my flowers very quickly and came running down the stairs and said to Mark, something's happened. And I was shaking as I came down, and Mark took me home and he said, "Why, what happened?" And I told him what happened. And he said, just go back and finish your flowers and come away. And I did that, and we never talked about it until Mark had written this down. And then at a certain point, you asked me about it, so I had told you about this before. I did, many years later in Ojai, ask him. I said, Krishnaji, there's one thing I haven't really understood completely, and I related the instance. And it isn't as if he remembered, because, if he turned around and looked, no, but he just said that you saw something. So what are you asking me? Are you doubting? I said, no, I saw something, and that's very clear. So he said, that's all there is. He didn't in any way try and explain it. So,
Was that the only such experience? Because there's a lot here, and let's go on to the last clip.
A new school had been built in Bangalore, and Kay was invited to give talks there to the students. And they built a beautiful shamiana with brightly colored panels. And Kay sat on a small platform, and he spoke to the children. You were there because you filmed and took photographs of that. And at the end of the talk, one little girl was sitting in the audience. They were all rather young children. They were middle school age children. One little girl stayed back, and she was sitting there, and other students had left, and Kay was still sitting there. He hadn't got off the platform. And all of a sudden she looked up, and near where Kay was sitting, and she pointed, and she said, an angel. And Kay said to her with a gesture, don't say anything. Don't speak of it. They had both seen something, but it wasn't to be spoken of. Now this, I think, is not typical, but it's an example of the kind of thing that shows the way he dealt with
You either see it
or you don't.
or you don't.
And if you see it, you don't need to do anything with it. It is just there.
Wow. Did I come back to? Are we back to the stop sharing the screen? Or you're back
Absolutely.
live with the image?
Absolutely.
Yeah. What comes to mind is the limitless possibilities outside of our daydream, right? Unlimited, this David Bohm, unlimited potential, unlimited experiences that are available to us outside of our daydream, which we've been talking about. And I think these are some of the hints that are there, and they've been there throughout history in various ways. But all of that is hidden by the habits of mind, by our concepts, by our images, mental images and concepts, hide this vast potential, this explosive potential of what we actually are. So we're 90 minutes. I'm happy to continue, and I do think we need to open this to questions. Maybe Asha or Mark, would you like to comment about those last two clips, because they're loaded?
I will let Asha make a comment.
I mean, you do talk about what I saw that through the doorway, and it's like it makes you think that it couldn't be there or it wasn't there, but it was there. And for someone who is very based in reality and not imagination, to see a figure that the very slight and slender figure of Kay walking through the doorway, but instead it was like a tall, very luminescent figure. And it sort of, it couldn't be anything else but him, and yet it wasn't him. And just to see that was, in a way, very stunning, because he was taller and larger and luminescent in his appearance, with a very benevolent kind of look. And when he turned to sort of acknowledge, or even in a way, not just pass by, but to say that I see you in spite of the fact you're trying to shrink behind the shadows, and in a very sort of benevolent way, was very unusual and very unthreatening. It sort of opened up something that was, I didn't understand or did understand, or just was open to what was there. And so I just received it and he went off. But it stayed with me, and I, at a certain point, did go to him, even though I had moved away from Vishu Valley and come to America. And so I said to him, I said, sir, I want to ask you something that hasn't always, I want to understand it. And it happened, and I want to find out what you think about it. So I related the instance to him. And he looked at me and he said, you saw something? I said, yes. So he said, is there anything else other than what you saw? I said, no. He said, that's it. So that was his explanation, and that was very true and right.
Again, I love the fact that he, you know, for him to have given you anything, you know, the intellect would have gone nuts with it. You know,
No.
any little nibble, it would have, you know, it would have made this big thing, right? So he saved you from that. He saved you by, you know, so he allowed you to stay with what you, with what he used the word what is. He allowed you to stay with what is, instead of dropping back into your dream and going mad, literally, with whatever little tidbit it would have done. So I mean, this was so quintessential K to respond just the way he did and not let you go back into the dream. I just really relish that. I think it's great. So.
Because it wasn't a dream; it was really
no. I'm saying dream being intellect. That's what I mean. Yeah. I'm not saying that what you saw was a dream. No. Just the opposite. Yes.
Yeah. Michael, I think we will, since we are running slightly behind, take on some of the questions and answers if anyone has these.
Yes, please.
Yes. Quite a few incredible elements which you have gone across. I think I'm going to start with one, Michael, and this is for you, really. You mentioned that thought is metaphorical, and the very concept of reification, which you said is translating of the brain and mind and consciousness. You even mentioned consciousness. Now, the question of whenever you talk about reification, isn't it again caught up with what I would perceive or I would see or I would within the realm of the known, because this has to be something which is far beyond what I'm trying to translate. Is there some regressiveness in this whole concept, or is it something which grows with period of time when you let go of the intellect to take the other subtle nuances of understanding the outer?
Well, basically, David was the one who explained this to me, and he did it quite well. And this was part of his writing at the time, called Thought as a System, where he went into this rather nicely. And basically, to reify, basically, thought is metaphoric, right? It's symbolic and metaphoric. So we use language as the tool to trigger the mental images. That's what language is. Language are little capsules that explode imagery. Every word, that's why descriptive narrative and storytelling is so important, because it builds this capacity to play with inner imagery. That's what we call imagination. So imagination is purely symbolic and metaphoric. But the trick comes in to reify means that we no longer treat it as an imaginative structure. We treat what we imagine as though it had a concrete reality independent of thought. That's what reify means. So we're playing a trick on ourselves, and we're not aware that we're playing the trick. And that's how David said it. It's like we're the magician, and we're tricking ourselves into this reification. And nationalism is reified, and the ego is reified, and all of these beliefs become reified, and we treat it not as a metaphor, but we treat it as a concrete reality. So that's what reification means to me. And it is, when Mark said at the very beginning, we need to understand who we are and how we work. We need to know ourselves. That's the doorway to the other, because then that awareness negates the reification. You no longer reify it. You no longer, treat the rope as a snake, et cetera, et cetera. So, so that awareness of how the thought process actually works is the step that is missing in Western culture. The Buddhists have been doing that for a long time. And as we talked during our workshop, this is ground floor. Number one is to pay attention. And then number two is to deconstruct all the reified beliefs that we've created about ourselves and others and culture and so on and so forth. So that's a distillation of the whole thought process, which brings, as Mark was saying, it brings you to a new clarity of what's going on. So you're no longer, you step out of the magician role. You're using thought as a creative tool, but you realize that that's what you're doing, and you don't mistake it for something else. I hope that was clear.
Very much, Mike. Thank you for that. Is there anybody else who would like to put forward some questions, some clarifications? Kamalji?
Hello.
Yes, Pravidya.
I would like to put one question to Mark Lee. Actually, I have been noticing this particular word, negation, all this and that. Now, negating is something, it's some sort of action. When one sees something false, when something illusory, then mind negates. What I would like to know from Mark Lee is whether in this action of negation, there is any act of thought. How does mind negate? Is it through thought?
Well, I think there's always the risk that the mind is going to think about it and decide whether it's right or wrong, and weigh it on. This is the analytical mind. It does this sort of thing. So it uses thought, but it's actually not that. There is no thought involved. It is, as Kay says, choicelessly aware. It's the action has no thought. The action has no movement. It simply drops it. It negates it. It finishes it. But it's in perception. It's not in it's not using thought and idea, to categorize it and then deal with it accordingly. So it's not an action of the intellect.
I would like to add to that and my metaphor of the image that I really like, and I'm borrowing from David Bohm again. You know, when you actually see the trick, you see that you're really, they really didn't cut the woman in half. It was some other illusion that made it appear that it was that. Now, the actual seeing of the trick that revealed that the woman was not being cut in half didn't come through the intellect, didn't come through thought. There was an actual seeing of something which negated the illusion. So the seeing, it was negated in that state of perception. It wasn't analysis or negation. I'm going to negate the woman being sawed in half. The perception was the action, and that was the phrase that Kay would use, that the perception is the action.
Right.
Thank you for that. Pravita, does that answer your question? I think Pravita is on mute. Anybody else would like to put forward a question?
Sir, I would like to ask a question.
Sure.
He always alluded to the word truth. In fact, his seminal speech, "Truth is a pathless land." What did he really mean when he kept on saying truth? You will see truth. Is it somewhat he was, referring to what ma'am Asha saw? Did he mean that kind of truth? I've never understood what he meant when he said truth. Truth is a pathless land.
Michael, could you speak to that?
Well, it's, I'm going to sound like a broken record, because basically truth is not an intellectual concept. Truth is when you wake up from the dream, which the intellect and verbal narrative and concepts is, then you see what is, and what is true. It's true. So that's, I think, what he means by it. Truth is seeing accurately what is, unfiltered by all your beliefs and your conditioning and et cetera, et cetera. So I think and he would also say that truth is a living thing. It's life itself. It's this dynamic movement of the universe, exploding right before you in the moment. That's what truth is. I would flip it also and say the metaphor or the dream state is not true in this way. It's a dream. You're not seeing truthfully. The word true means accurate, as in a measurement is correct. So to see without any delusion, to see without any dream, to have that explosive quality of attention that Mark was alluding to before, that's truth.
And perhaps there's only a singular truth, right? You can't have two versions of truth in different ways.
What I mean to say is, in the world in which we all human beings live, in this real world, is it true or it is not true?
Is the
Mark,
word
Hello, am I clear? Hello?
Yeah, we've heard your question, Pravida.
Okay. That is over. Then please, I'm waiting.
Yeah, any time that you move into, again, the Buddhist references the relative. I'm using the metaphor of a dream because we all have our relative reality, and it's quite obvious. It does all kinds of things. But when that's silent, when that's empty, when that's not operative, another state of perception comes into being, and that's what I think is true. But they would also, do we all see the same reality? No, the brain actually creates what we call reality. We're not seeing through the portholes of the eyes. We're seeing the imagery that the eyes and the sensory system produces. So the brain actually creates what we call reality. And because the humans all have pretty much the same operating system, then all humans more or less see the same thing when they look out there. but has been known for a long time. You know, ants look at the same phenomena, and their body and their constitution and how they sense the world, their reality is fundamentally different, or a bird or an elephant. So the common species share a more or less a common reality, but reality is species specific, or system specific. I don't know whether that answered your question or not.
May I say something?
Yes, yes, please.
I would like to underline Mr. Banerjee's question is the idea from Advaita philosophy, Shankaracharya, whether the world, the phenomenal world, is an illusion. Am I right in interpreting that, Prabir? And I don't think for Krishnamurti it was an illusion, because he urged students, for instance, to look at, to observe the way the light falls on the tree, the way light falls on the rock. So for him, rocks and trees and human suffering, the poverty around Rishi Valley were real. They were not illusory. So I do think, if my assumption that Prabirda's question is has as an assumption Shankaracharya's idea of illusion, the world, phenomenal world as illusion, I think not. Krishnaji cannot be understood in terms of Shankaracharya wholly, perhaps in some way, to some extent.
So I have two books that I'm going to hold up, just so that, because both books are addressing the question that you're raising, or the observation that you're raising. You know, is the universe illusory? The phenomenal world illusory? Is it all just imagined? Is it all consciousness, and so on? The first one is called Quantum and the Lotus. Let me see what see, my image is backwards. I hope that looks straight to you. This is a Buddhist monk and a astrophysicist, and they're exploring together many of the nuances of both all of these kinds of issues that you're talking about. It's really quite a wonderful book, and it's really trying to bring into some balance the traditional Buddhist teachings about reality, about what they call the science of the mind, as well as quantum mechanics and so on and so forth. So I would highly recommend that this would be a wonderful contemporary reference to that. And then this is one that I haven't actually read yet, but it's really on exactly the same theme, and it's called The Grand Biogenic Design by Robert Lanza. And he's really talking about this notion of imagery. He's addressing straight on the issue or the question that you're addressing. And I haven't read them. I'm in the middle of one of them, so I can't really do it, but they're right on to that. So I'll send you some notes when I finish the books.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Mark. Kamalji, would you like to unmute yourself, and can you hear us, Kamalji?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
I know we have overshot our initial time limit, but we can't help it. It's just incredible, this session, and getting Mark and Michael together makes it crazily exciting. So would you like to just
sure.
take over now and
Sure. So just a brief note of thanks to Michael. Must have worked so hard to get it all together. I mean, this is quite typical of Michael. He did that in the previous program as well. So meticulous that it had to be seen to see how much work goes into it. Thanks to Mark and Asha. So good to see you again, both together. We saw you early this year in Calcutta. That was so good to spend time. And now we've seen you again, at least on the screen, sitting together. And thanks to all our guests, and they've been from all over the place. As I said, they've been from all over India, Many of them we haven't even met, face to face, and some from outside India. And special thanks to, I mentioned their names because they're watching this program at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. in the morning in Brazil. Eduardo Weaver, Ricardo, and Carlo. Thank you so much for joining in from far away. Also, Sharif Mogdad from Dubai. We'll get to know each other better. And thanks to all our friends from Krishnamurti Foundation and other places in India. Just to say, if you remember when you watched Michael's program, Michael had sent an invitation that, often we don't think of the questions on the spot. I mean, they come later. I think when you're absorbing things and you suddenly something. So if you want to send questions, do send them to us. I'll be writing about it. I'll send an email. Do write to us, and then we'll wait for a week, and then we'll send those questions. So, this program will be available soon, in a week or so. So again, when you will have a chance to watch it again, maybe pass it on to friends. And again, do keep in touch. Send us feedback. Send us suggestions. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you, everyone, for being there with us.
Thank you all.
We have had more than 60 participants, and from, like Kamalji mentioned, from all across the world. And it's wonderful again that you could take time off on a weekend. Thank you and goodbye. I will have this video up by this weekend, so you all can listen to this treasure really over a period of time. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.